Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Powell, thanks again for coming before this committee today, and thank you for your service to our great state of Oklahoma. Can you tell me what role you play if a listing is done and finalized by the at the federal level by the Fish and Wildlife on the lesser prairie chicken, the American, what I call the dung beetle, because around my part of the country you can kick over any piece of pile of whatever and you can find these dung beetles. What concerns do you have if your role is diminished going forward on the species recovery?
What we worry about from a state standpoint is the state really has no purpose once a listing's done. The federal government comes in, takes over all coordination of the species. The state can serve as just a general commenter on just like any other individual, but that's probably not enough when we have at least in Oklahoma, our Department of Wildlife Conservation has a constitutional duty to oversee fish and game and wildlife in the state and make sure that the resources of the state are protected.
What resources do the state's wildlife agencies possess that the Fish and Wildlife Services don't?
Probably the biggest resource, Congressman, as you know, is just the trust, the relationships. Most Oklahomans like getting out recreating. They like hunting. They like fishing. They have relationships with their game wardens. They have relationships with their biologists. They have relationships with individuals who are working to go through and help what they want to do. That's lost. The federal government is not out there. They're not out there in the fields. They're not out there working with Oklahomans to go through and try to go through and figure out how we can improve habitat, how we can improve species. That's the biggest issue that's lost.
You know, and just being from Oklahoma, obviously, relationship is everything. I mean, I bring this point up all the time that there isn't anybody that wants to take care of our land better than we do. My children are the fourth generation on the land that I grew up on, and we want our wildlife to be there. We want things to be there, but we want to have a working partner. And every time it seems like that we allow some agency to get involved, then that doesn't have the relationship, that doesn't have the personal connection to our land, it just seems like they take common sense and throw it completely out the window, and they start enforcing things that doesn't seem to fit. One size doesn't fit all. If we can allow the states to set back and do their job. Now, if the states aren't taking care of it, fine. There's a role there. There's a constitutional role there. But if the states are taking care of it, and we're seeing that the numbers are improving, we're seeing that we're doing our due diligence to do what we can, then the federal government should stay out of our business. And I think that's basically what you're saying. I'm adding a little bit more to it. But anyways, Mr. Powell, it's my understanding that the state officials have repeatedly asked the Fish and Wildlife Service to explain why the service drastically changed the lesser prairie chicken listing from a priority number of 8 down to 2. And is that correct?
That is correct.
Have you got any feedback? Have you been told why? I mean, considering that our numbers have been swinging back up, have we got any explanation from them?
We did ask that question, and I believe that there has also been a number of congressional letters that have asked that question. The response that is received back from the Fish and Wildlife Service essentially said that there continue to be threats to the habitat.
Have they been out there with you? Have you been in contact with them? Have they been out there and looked at it themselves?
We've been in fairly regular contact with the Fish and Wildlife Service, but they have failed to specify exactly what the threats are and what exactly could be done, where states look for a creative solution to go through and try to solve these problems.
So I'm not confused on this, you haven't went out in the field with them. They haven't worked with you on this. This is just something that they came up with themselves and said they were going to list it, drop it from 8 to 2, which is a huge drop.
It's a huge drop. It takes us from a position that historically the service might not have gotten to essentially the next in line. The service has gone through at some point, I'm sure, at a biologist and at a low staff level, been out in the field, but most of the people who are making the key decisions have not been out in the fields with our biologists, with our Department of Wildlife personnel.
Last question is, what is the state and the industry? You guys are working together. What have you done that benefits the lesser prairie chicken?
One of probably the biggest things that's happened prior to when the wind energy industry was beginning in Oklahoma in the early 2000s, our state's largest utility, Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company, came to the state and said, we want to go through and proactively protect the lesser prairie chicken and other species that these wind farms, that these transmission lines may go through and harm. OG&E, just out of the generosity of their heart, went through and provided $9 million as offset to be used for land acquisition, for additional research, to go through and be used for habitat conservation, to go through and be used for other purposes, all to help protect the lesser prairie chicken. That was no mandate of the state. That was no mandate of the federal government.
That was just the industry and the state working together.
Yes.
Mr. Powell, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.